What's good, YouTube and Twitch? We're currently live to both, and we've got another card discussion for you guys, and that's, does the extra deck need to change? It's been an entire decade since the last change was made to how the extra deck worked outside of new mechanics such as Xyz, pendulums, etc. But we haven't had a change to how many cards can fit in our initial starting extra deck since the Synchro era, where we could play infinite numbers that existed in the game all the way down to just 15 cards. And I still see in my comment section today once in a while, man, I really wish they would change things up and put the extra deck to 20. I feel like it's an age-old argument to expand the extra deck, to expand the options in the game, and it was cut down in the Synchro era. So a decade later, would more options be good for the meta game, good for the casual decks, and good for the entire game itself? Well, we'll start with the more casual decks, and we'll give a, yeah, that would help, but there's a big asterisk. When we look towards the general meta game, more options tend to be a problem because you generically can just have more outs or more things to go into, and the decks that can abuse that the best will rise to the top due to it. We take a look at one of the top decks, Goki, and their resources really allow them to link up through so many things. So having extra options, say you can just play 2 Nightmare Phoenix and 2 Nightmare Cerberus in your extra deck now, instead of having to cut down to 1 and 2 or 1 and 1. Imagine just the extra links that actually provides and the protection to the extra link for the Goki decks. And that's just the start of the options that you get in Goki's. Goki's resource game, combined with Firewall, which apparently isn't gonna get banned anytime soon for the game, allows it to recur its resources through an engine like no other. So even slamming the Goki engine itself, it might still be able to continue in a way that no other deck would, and you create these really strengthened extra links when you can just play as many Phoenix as you want because you have 20 now and Cerberus. So I think when we're looking at the metagame, I think an expansion is still unhealthy. If anything, we should be maybe looking at restriction of copies per extra deck monster, but that would kill certain decks, right? Like you have Thunder Dragons here. You certainly need multiple Colossus just for the nature of going into Titans. So if you were to say make a restriction to your extra deck of you can only play one of each extra deck monster, you immediately were to make this mass change and put everything in the extra deck to 1, it would kill certain decks and really harm the future creation of the card game. So I don't think that's necessarily an answer either. But to bring it all back around, I think 15 is currently a rather fine number because you end up having to make cuts in almost every single deck. There's very few decks that ignore the extra deck like True Draco or Altergeist. And when you get into kind of ignoring the extra deck or expanding the extra deck depending on different things, other things become more viable. Like, let's talk about Scapegoat. Scapegoat was even talked about, like, ending up banned again, and a lot of people wanted it to 1. It found its way back to semi-limited at 2 on our current ban list. Imagine just being able to have 5 extra cards and say, oh, let me play a Boneless Link Spider misses, and a transition into another rank 4 in any extra deck at all compared to what you can run now. Oh, I can just shove in the Ib and Ningirsu combo to spot free, take care of anything, and get myself a draw with the Scapegoats in any one monster in any deck without any repercussion whatsoever. I think that being able to expand the extra deck, while it could help rogue decks, just raises the ceiling on the meta decks all the more for your options. And also, maybe Cherries would become more of a mainstay in the meta game among the other Ghost Girls. She comes in and out of formats. She definitely appears more so in the tier 0 formats such as Spiral or Zodiac. But Cherries, I think, like, does it have an even harder time in this? I don't think so, because with 20 cards, I think one deck will take over more linearly because they abuse the extra deck mechanic more, having more options. So when we went back to the Synchro era and we made a long-term fix for 15 cards to the extra deck, I think it was for the better. I think there might have been eras where going ahead and expanding to 20 could have been okay for the game, but I don't think you can continue to expand and flux and expand and flux. I think 15 limits, while quote-unquote stuffing creativity by a lot of your standards, is good for the game. Having to make cuts is healthy. Not being able to play everything you want in a deck is healthy for the game, because the decks that abuse the ceiling higher gain more options. Like, look, I could just play Exciton now in my Gokis. I have a needless out that otherwise wouldn't be played in the regular Goki deck, but if my back's against the wall and all of a sudden with rematch and say another level 4 and being able to find a way to summon the card suddenly becomes to my advantage through the extra deck, because I previously didn't have room, oh boy, extra outs, or I can just play my stall floodgate rank 4, so I can play more ways to just take care of cards. So the ceiling definitely becomes higher for the meta decks than the niche, like, rogue decks that say, man, gee, I sure wish I had 2 or 3 more slots for this card or that card. And there were some conversations in the open chat just a bit ago saying, well, you could do it specifically here or there, or you can make restrictions to it. You can't make this game any more complicated than it already is. It has the highest learning curve for the entire game. So making restrictions on how you could add or what you could add, like somebody suggested specifically, if you add certain cards to the extra deck, you now have to play 50 cards or 60 cards. Like, it makes the entry all the harder to understand. Oh, so if I want 18 cards in my extra, I have to play 50 in the main, that kind of stuff. It may seem simple at first, but just adding more rules to the already most complicated game doesn't seem like an answer to me. And yeah, that would help more like the mill decks, the 60 card decks, Infernoid, Lightsworn, some legacy support, but that's more wishful thinking in my book, because you're still adding complications on for a newer player. Like, I'm playing 15, why does he get 18? Why does he get 20? That kind of thing, you know? Why does the limit bust up for every 5 in the main deck? Like, it may seem simple, but like, it definitely just adds a level of complication. So I see in the chat, I'd be happy with 18. Ooh, the legal limit, you say. Well, 18 still gives the advantage more so to, I think, the decks that can abuse the extra deck the best. Like, Thunder Dragons right now are a deck that's on the outside looking in. They're rogue, they're topping a couple of slots now. They started out really powerful, but some decks are even cutting copies of Titan down to 2 in order to make sacrifices for other, because they want to play Instant Fusion. So Instant Fusion is another kind of topic for this option, where you could play Instant Fusion and just have a Thousand Eyes Restrict that now goes into Link Revo and any single deck. Like, yeah, this seems more creative, right? Like, more decks can play extra things. We can add options to the main deck, but at the end of the day, what's going to abuse that the best? It's going to be the meta, not the rogue decks, unless you specifically create extra deck cards that favor those kind of decks that aren't rogue, and then they become the meta. Whatever can abuse the extra deck the best seems like what in today's meta becomes the best, and that's just how it works. Whatever can abuse the link mechanic the best right now tends to be winning the events overall. Like, Sky Strikers can tag out into the extra deck. They're the first to really break that mechanic. They special summon cards, link cards from the extra deck, which most other decks don't bother to do. And so you see that's why Sky Strikers have a lot of ability through Ray, despite kind of floating around one monster at a time on the field. Like, being able to break a mechanic's always powerful, but give Sky Strikers even more options in the extra deck, give them more reasons to play something like Scapegoat and actually establish power on the board. That's pretty crazy to me. Imagine an extra Link Sky Striker deck. I can't even fathom it. So anybody in open chat, like we were talking about back in the past, like the Synchro era and stuff like the strongest Synchro ever. Do you guys think that there's any need to expand the extra deck, or what kind of changes might you make if you were to really step forward and make a change?
As more of an Altergeist player that doesn't need the extra deck, just limiting the options of my deck to play something like Cherries or the other combo decks themselves would be interesting.
Like, expand on your thoughts. What do you mean?
For example, in Altergeist, you only go in about 4 different monsters, 3 Hexies and a Link Reaver.
Okay.
That means you have about 11 other cards that basically either other outs cards, such as the Crusadia, Equamax for, say, Ultimate Falcon, or you have 11 other cherry targets to hinder other decks from playing. So basically what that makes the choice in deck building, it makes future deck building aspects for other combo decks and stun or control type decks make proper decisions in deck building, so it makes people better.
So you're saying in a more diverse format, a deck that doesn't play an extra deck could use cherries to a better ability?
Ideally, yes.
Ideally, yeah, in a perfect world. But at the same time, you also are going to have those formats where now that you can play extra deck options, now I can go, you cherries one thing, now I can try to go towards something else because I had that option in my extra deck. Like, imagine BA, where banishing, they have Dante banished, so now their Beatrice and other Dante are dead. You killed 5 cards out of their extra deck. Well, now they still have a 15-card extra deck to use their toolbox with.
Well, I mean, to be fair, that's what Danger does now. If you've Cherry's Firewall, they just go into Gumblar and hand it for 4.
Yeah, but instead, that's like 1 card where, like, versus like the 5 dead in Burning Abyss.
That's true.
So, chat, I've had a lot of fun with this. Like, I think a lot of you guys have. Anybody else have any says before we kind of give a wrap on this?
Plus a Beatrice equals...
You cut out a lot there.
Sorry. 3 Dantes plus a Beatrice equals 5.
Oh my god. And the other person, what do you say?
I was just gonna... Oh, no, you go. Okay. So I was thinking that if they were to expand the extra deck, they would likely design archetypes that would require a large extra deck commitment for powerful plays. And then decks that could not use the extra deck as much could have a more generic toolbox cards in there, and that could be a unique strength. For example...
One second. First, I gotta thank Farfa for hosting making a video. 156 people. Shout out. Not to interrupt your train of thought. And just real quick, like, I feel like with the FTKs that happen, like, a lot of the FTKs, like, they burn down to 3, like, cards left in the extra deck. So if you were able to stop them late or knew where to stop them late, they gain more options to, like, protect themselves. But continue. Go ahead.
So, like, I was thinking that a lot of combos, even now, would require, like, 16 to 20 extra deck cards. So if the meta was balanced around decks needing less extra deck space, they would be potentially more powerful. So you can think of something like Zodiac, where you have your core engine that's very small, and the rest of the deck was completely tech cards and outs, right? And that's part of what made that deck so good. So you could potentially see something like that in an extra deck form.
Interesting. And the final person, I think one other person was trying to talk.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar, just that, like, we have so many staple cards like the Nightmares, and that you would just be able to fit more certain situations, or outs for certain situations, like what's the level 4? The evil, the one that just got on the ban list, the level...
Exciton Knight?
Yeah, Exciton would become a lot more... Cards like those would become staples just because you have the room, and would lead to a little bit more creativity, but in the end, it would ultimately just give too much more to combo decks just for more space and more...
Yeah, see, that's kind of how I feel at the end of it, too. It's going to give a higher ceiling to the decks that already had the meta under its foot, and it's not really going to provide more to the rogue decks, which I feel like a lot of people hoped for the options of. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to bounce on that topic. Like, it's the old argument, well, if I just had this banned card in my deck, my deck would be so much better. Yeah, so would every other deck.
All right, guys, we're going to wrap the conversation up there for YouTube. If you enjoyed the conversation, give this video a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know what you guys think. What kind of changes would you make to the extra deck? I think the most interesting argument is limiting it to 1 per card in an extra deck, but at the same time, like I said, that just completely kills certain extra decks, and you can't just make all these odd out restrictions for certain decks. So, like, what kind of generic change might you think of R&Ding the game that you would make to the extra deck? I don't think expanding to 20 is good. I don't think limits are good. I think it's somewhat fine how it is, where it forces you to make those tough decisions in deck building, and I personally enjoy that. And I like the extra deck how it is, but a lot of people do want to see change there. So what do you guys think about it personally?
Lower it to 10, John.
What's up?
Lower it to 10.
Oh, God.